all for coming. I think I've managed to get around most of you and say hello, but thank you so much for joining us this evening, and thank you to Hugh and Tiggy for joining us for this conversation. The areas relating to food poverty and diet that we would like to talk about tonight are the inequalities of food, diet and health and the situation in Devon, what the government is doing around the prevention of diet-related disease and poverty, and what we can do now to help people to improve their diet so we can prevent the scourge of poor diet leading to even poorer health. So we'll make a start. So we live in a really beautiful part of the country, and it's a wonderful time of year for local produce. What is your favourite thing to make at this time of year? I'll go to you first, Hugh.
You're right, it is an amazing time of year, and I think we've just experienced with those incredibly delicious canapes, which were so beautifully seasonal. We've got that moment where at the end of the summer and we're moving into the autumn, we've still got lots of tomatoes, cucumbers, and then we're looking forward to squashes and then some winter roots and stuff like that. So there's a great abundance. So it's a time where it can get quite confusing because there's so much choice. I do get very excited. I mean, I've been doing so many different things with tomatoes, and also the fruit this year has been ridiculously abundant. Who here has got a fruit tree or an orchard? Do you agree that there have never been so many plums, never been so many apples, but it's not just the orchards and the soft fruits and the things we're growing, it's in the hedgerow too. I've never seen so many blackberries, the haws on the hawthorns, the sloes, even the acorns on the oak trees. And I've told a few of you this evening, but I'm rearing pigs at home. We have had pigs at River Cottage almost every year. We just always have them there. But I haven't reared pigs at home for a few years. It's something I love to do. And I've got them in what used to be the goat run, and it's overhung by oak trees. And when I brought them in, it was just when the acorns started falling down, and the pigs were going around munching the acorns. And I thought, well, that's going to make them taste great. And I started collecting up the acorns and in a bucket and scattering them around to make sure that they had plenty. And then the first winds came, and I went down the next day, and the whole place was carpeted. Ever since then, it's been a bit windy, more acorns come down. I'm worried they're going to actually get acorn poisoning. I mean, they are not going to... Anyway, I digress. So, yeah, it's a great time of year for cooking, but I do get very excited about the apples now. So I'm thinking about the first crumbles, and I do think that you can make a crumble a little bit differently that makes it a bit healthier, and I promise no less delicious. When we bake, we often we go straight to old school favourite recipes for things like crumbles, and they always have too much sugar in the crumble, and you could take about half of it out. You've still got lots of sweetness there. You can add some oats in for some crispiness, maybe some ground almonds, a little bit of extra fibre there too, and lovely flavour. Walnuts, if you like walnuts, and just make them a bit more crispy and crumbly. And so an apple crumble at this time of year with a slightly tweaked, nuttier, oatier crumble, that would probably be top of my list.
Thank you. Tiggy?
Well, unfortunately, you've just stolen my thunder.
Were you going to go apple crumble?
No, blackberry and apple.
We should have conferred, really, shouldn't we?
But luckily, I had another one up my sleeve.
Oh, great. Well done.
So I not only thought of my own blackberry and apple crumble that I was thinking about, but actually I asked the Project Food people, what have they been cooking, what's been the favourite thing that we've cooked, because we get some lovely vegetables every week from Lower Hewood Farm, and they said the courgette and chickpea curry. So that's completely different, and the courgettes are so sweet because they're so fresh that it just tastes amazing. So
great.
Thank you. I do think it's really important to realise that not everyone benefits from the abundance of produce at this time of year. A recent study by Public Health Devon shows that between 2021 and 2022, the number of households living with food insecurity increased from 17% to 29%. This means that a third of Devon skip meals because they can't afford it, or they actively choose the cheap options. What impact does food insecurity and food poverty have on people's physical and mental health?
Well, obviously, Tiggy knows a huge amount of this because and everyone who's working for Project Food is working on the front line of this problem. And the fact that the problem is getting worse is very concerning. I think the really important thing is that we should not underestimate the impact on people's well-being in every sense, their physical health and their mental well-being, if they're not eating well. It's actually devastating. If you're not supported by good nutrition, and also it's a vicious circle because it's often the stress that you feel and the anxiety that you feel that pushes you down a certain route to take easy choices, not to engage with what you might perceive as a very stressful activity of cooking. And then the poor nutrition that you're getting makes you physically weaker and more stressed. So people are really actually locked into a very, very difficult life situation where they may be suffering from lots of mental stresses and they're not getting any weller with the way they eat. So it's a really difficult thing. And obviously what Project Food is all about is breaking that cycle, intervening and finding the point where you can help someone. And as Tiggy was saying, it's not always the same way with depending on who you're approaching. So it's having an open mind and being able to work at a local level and with such a great team gives you that opportunity, doesn't it, to know where to get in. But I mean, you have had so many experiences of people whose lives are seriously blighted by poor nutrition. So I've been talking perhaps a bit theoretically. Maybe you've got some really good examples of just how much it brings people down.
Yeah, I mean, there's a recent survey about the people living in food poverty in Devon specifically and about how poor their mental health is as a result of that, as you were saying. I mean, very clearly, there's a very clear link with food poverty and poor mental health. And I think that I thus find it really interesting. Just down the road from us is Newton Poppleford, which is one of the most prosperous areas of East Devon. And the life expectancy there is 90. And then probably only 5 miles down the road from that, maybe a little bit more, is Littleham in Exmouth, and their life expectancy is more than 10 years less than that. But the most telling thing, I think, about this is more the healthy life expectancy. And actually the difference between the rich and poor in healthy life expectancy is around 20, a woman would live for 24 years at the end of her life unhealthy from a poor area of Devon, and only about 10 from richer areas. So there's a huge, that's a quarter of your life in ill health at the end. And a lot of that is to do with your diet. And a lot of that is that you just cannot make the choices and access the food that you really need to make your body function better, really. And so I think that the impact then on the individual is huge. We know that poor diet results in things like type 2 diabetes. Type 2 diabetes is enormously costly to the NHS. It is enormously detrimental to the people who suffer from it. The complications, whether it's sight loss or kidney failure or amputations, it causes terrible, terrible difficulties for people and disability. And that, again, causes more mental health problems. And so you have this awful vicious cycle of people just not being able to get out of the situation they're in. And so much of that is to do with the fact that they cannot afford, and they, even if they did have a slightly higher income, they still didn't have the skills or the confidence to properly cook nutritious food because they've had no background in it and they don't know where to start. And I think that that's a very important thing about we've lost our education from schools for now 2 or 3 generations, really. So people who are having children, you know, say at 30 now, they didn't have any proper food education either. So there's a continual problem of people just not understanding really what to do with food.
I think it's also worth mentioning that it's not just the vicious cycle of stress, poor mental health, poor decisions. You actually need good food for your mind and brain to work well. You absolutely do. And the science is becoming stronger and stronger on this. And the increasing interest in the importance of our gut microbiome and keeping it well nourished with a diversity of foods and having that great diversity of food equals diversity of your gut microbiome. Your gut microbiome actually plays a vital role in synthesizing your brain chemicals. All the key neurotransmitters function at their best only when you're getting good nutrition and your gut's healthy. So it's not just stress is a big part of it, and that vicious circle. But you do need to eat well for good brain function and to be mentally well.
And yes, and actually, if you go to children on that, I mean, children will not develop their full capacity with poor nutrition. It's quite straightforward. And we have about a third in Devon of children are either overweight or obese. And they then not only lack the capacity to reach their potential, but they also get bullied. And it's just it's just not nice for people. Really, it's not a fun way to live. Yeah. Really not.
So a lot of the poor health that people live with is clearly linked to diet. The government spends just 1% of its direct payments to our farmers for the cultivation of fruit and veg, which means it makes it more expensive than ultra-processed foods. So is healthy eating a topic that is only relevant for the privileged who can afford it? And if so, why do you think this is?
Well, we can't let it be. We can't let the conversation only happen in rooms like this, where most of us are lucky enough to have access to really great food. And that is what you've described. That is health inequality, food inequality. It's a problem of access, and it's a problem of education. And we have to break that cycle. It is problematic that fresh fruit and vegetables are often quite expensive. Prices vary a lot. The other culture we have is of supermarkets tending to focus all their marketing and their buy one, get one free offers at the ultra-processed cheap end of the market, rather than making good price offers on fresh fruit and veg to encourage people to buy them. But even if they did that, I mean, this is the first question, and I think we're going to start getting into it a little bit this evening about what government can and should be doing. And actually the answer is a lot. We have amazing charities not that many charities like Project Food, but doing amazing work and picking up a problem that isn't properly being addressed by government and by policy. And if you want to take the whole picture of what's problematic about food in the UK and what's making people ill, there are actually lots of levers the government can pull. Because And also to have a real impact, they would need to pull them all. But what they tend to do is talk a lot about doing something, announce some sort of pilot, and then hope that people are going to just give them a pat on the back, and then they won't have to worry about the food policy bit anymore. But when it comes to the specific question of getting people involved with fresh produce, cost is one thing, but simple familiarity with those things is another. And that has to happen at school. I mean, in a lucky family, it will happen in the home. But for most kids, if it doesn't happen at school, it probably won't happen at all. And the idea that food education is a nice to have is just wrong. It's absolutely fundamental. And if we're going to raise a generation that does know what good food looks like and has the confidence to cook from scratch with fresh ingredients, because that is always going to be the best way to beat the cycle of depending entirely on ultra-processed foods, is to be able to get some... And fruit and veg, not all of it, there are things that are not expensive and not that hard to cook, but you've got to start somewhere. And as Tiggy and Project Food find out all the time, lots of people just haven't got that start and they haven't got that skill.
Yeah, not at all. I mean, and I think that the thing is, I set up Project Food 19 years ago, and at the time, I was told that healthy food was just a thing that middle-class people... It was the poor people weren't interested. They're literally, local community workers would say to me, you're completely wrong. They don't care what food they feed their children. And I knew they did. Every mum wants to do the best for their child, whatever your background is, whatever difficulties you're in. And I was appalled by that, to be quite frank. And I think that has been the problem in a sense. As you say, it's a sort of middle class obsession, and policymakers think that, and therefore it enables people to miss the point. Food is totally fundamental to everything.
People are on their case about something that the ordinary working folk don't care about.
And they fundamentally care.
They're absolutely wrong.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you. So you touched on it just slightly about government. So governments of all parties have been talking about implementing policies to improve the diet of the nation, but they always seem to row back from introducing new laws around food advertising and the composition of food. Why do you think this is?
Well, advertising the composition of food, it's called business. It's the food industry. It's an incredibly powerful lobby. You've got huge international businesses making billions of pounds by selling people really poor food. A lot of the money they make, they put into ensuring that they can go on making money. Some of that is called advertising. Some of it's called lobbying. It's extremely powerful and it's extremely effective. You mentioned only 1% of supporting horticulture in the UK. About 1% of the whole advertising spend in the whole of the UK is on fresh food. Of the advertising spent on food generally, it's a tiny amount that's on fresh ingredients, fruit and vegetables. And that money buys... it buys influence. I mean, advertising is incredibly effective, and also the way that the foods that make us ill are designed. It's not like they're disgusting. Let's admit it. Let's get it out there. A lot of these foods are absolutely irresistible, and that's because they're designed to be so. They're designed in a way that they press all our pleasure buttons. They override all sorts of information that should be telling us that we're getting full. One of the problems is a lot of these foods have got the key nutritional things stripped out of them because the ingredients they're made with are so refined, and they've been refined in order to make them malleable, plastic if you like. They can be bent into any shape. They can be combined with, you've got refined flours from different grains that can be combined with refined sugars and refined oils, and you can dust any flavouring over the top. You can get a computer to decide what the texture of your extruded potato snack is going to be. You can design it so it will be irresistible. And then you go in and you advertise it and you brand it, and you've got that extraordinary power. So whilst it is in a literal sense true that we do have, we do make the choices about what we put in our mouths and what we feed ourselves, so that allows certain ideological parts of the political spectrum to say it's just a choice. You choose what food you eat. We're not a nanny state. We're not going to tell you what food to put in your mouth. Interesting that the government at the time that was saying those kind of things, along came a devastating and unexpected health pandemic. Suddenly they were very ready to tell us how to live our lives, not to go to work, stay in. I'm not, by the way, saying that was necessarily poor advice specifically, but it is interesting that the mantra of we're not a nanny state, we don't tell people how to live their lives, we don't intervene in their health decisions. Well, you just did. So why wouldn't you intervene in a positive way to help people eat healthier food? Because the epidemic of poor diet is ongoing, it doesn't go away, and it's ultimately much more devastating than the short-term shock. And I don't want to minimize for a minute the problems of the pandemic. They were horrible. But so is the problem, the global, and we've got pretty much as bad as anywhere here in the UK, the problem of diet-related poor health. It's an epidemic. It needs serious attention from government, and they need to enact some policies, a whole raft of policies. We've touched on education. That's a key part of it. But controlling, or you can influence the compositions of foods by making rules. Like if you're not allowed to advertise your unhealthy foods, that doesn't. Of course, the junk food giants are up in arms about that. They want to be able to advertise to kids during primetime TV and on their phones and devices. But you're not saying you can't advertise your products. You're saying you can't advertise your products if they're really unhealthy. What it has the potential to do is motivate manufacturers to actually tweak their products and put better ingredients in them so that they don't have too much sugar, maybe they have more fiber, maybe they have less fat, and if therefore they would be allowed to advertise them. Improve them, then you can advertise them.
I think there's just one thing I'd like to add to that. I mean, I think that one of the really key things, I think, is that policymakers just don't understand the magnitude of the problem themselves. They don't understand how diet affects health, and they don't understand how poor people's understanding of diet and health is. We had somebody who was coming to one of our diabetes sessions, and he's had it for a number of years. And he's been to one or two nurses over the period of time, and she's talked to him about carbohydrates and blah, given him healthy eating advice. And after all these years of still having the disease and going back to see the doctor, and he said to us at our first session, "I don't know what a carbohydrate is." Yeah. So how can, I don't think policymakers get it. They just are completely living in cloud cuckoo land on this problem, I think.
I think you're absolutely right, and it's interesting you say that the training of everyone who works people who work in the health service do an extraordinary job under very stressful, difficult circumstances, but there is an absolute lack of training and understanding about food and nutrition. The whole medical mantra is about cure. It's not about prevention, and it's not about staying well and encouraging people to be well. I've heard several times that if you train to be a doctor, a GP, it takes up to at least 7 years training, and during that time you get one afternoon on nutrition, and in fact not everyone even remembers having that. How we eat is absolutely fundamental. That is the starting point of how well we're going to be. There are many factors that can influence our health, but none of them are as key and as universal as the way we eat. So why wouldn't you build that into your National Health Service? Why wouldn't you build that into the way you train your doctors? Why wouldn't you build that into your policy? And why wouldn't you build that into your rhetoric? Why wouldn't you go out and say, we understand, we get it. Because there are lots of amazing people working like Project Food is here, but also at a national level, doing the research to prove the science and make the case over and over again that we need to take action, and almost nothing happens. So occasionally you get a significant move. So earlier this year, the government decided to increase the availability of free school meals to all families on universal credit. That means that the reckoning is about 500,000 more school kids will now get free school meals. And they did that because they knew that there were a lot of people interested in diet, they were hearing the noise, and they felt they had to do something. And those of us who'd been campaigning in this area for quite a long time got quite excited. We thought, wow, this is great. And we thought, maybe this is a first step to doing what a lot of us, I can't speak for everyone, but a lot of us think it would be utterly transformational for this country if every primary school child had a proper meal at school every day for free. Yes, it would cost billions, but if you want to properly transform the food culture of the country, you've got to start with kids, and you've got to make it happen in school. You can, with amazing work, the kind of amazing work that Project Food does, you can reach people in their homes and you can reach families. But one place you can always reach young people is at school. That's where you, risk of repeating myself, and I said, this is where you can make that difference. In two ways. You've got to educate them about food, but you've got to put good food in front of them that gives them so they know what it looks like, and then they know what it feels like, because they go into their class feeling that they've been properly nourished and they're ready to learn. And if we got that right, as some countries do, that would be really, really transformational. And who wouldn't want that legacy? I would. That's what baffles me as a politician who probably does somewhere know that you know, what a difference that would make. If you think you've got a shot at 2 terms in government, you can make a measurable difference in 8 years. And if you made that difference, you might get elected for a 3rd time, because people really care about this stuff.
So you touched on what the government is doing with the free school meals. Have you got anything to add on what the government is actually doing, Tiggy?
Well, I'd like to talk a bit about East Devon, really, about the more local approach to it here, and really how they're thinking about addressing food poverty in particular. And it's a very, very piecemeal thing. The central government is sending grants to councils to give to charities like Project Food to hand out food, or we're not allowed to educate on this budget. We're only allowed to give
But you're
food.
damn well going to, aren't you? Just between these 4 walls. You might not be allowed to, but you do it every day.
My application has to be on a Monday, so I've got to be creative for Monday morning.
Okay.
Yes, well, we can do recipe boxes, though, so that gives people the skills, you know, at least it gives them instructions and it gives them all the ingredients. And actually, what people tell us is that one of the reasons they don't buy fruit and veg is because if you're on a very low income, you don't want to risk your child not eating it, because you don't know whether they will like it or not. Now, if they have it at school, as you said, that risk is taken away hugely.
Yeah.
But in this grant scheme that they're doing now to basically it's to food poverty because of food inflation, which is so high at the moment, is just, as I say, it just does food. It doesn't do any of the costs associated or any education or anything else. So it's tiny charities like Project Food that are actually carrying the burden of trying to really make the difference. And it just seems completely out of kilter, really, because as Hugh's so eloquently said, it makes a completely fundamental difference to everybody, and yet the way that it's being done is totally piecemeal. It's a sticking plaster. Yeah. And those things, and they make a huge fanfare of the household support fund is going to be X billion, but actually once you break it down to the number of people affected by food poverty, it's a tiny, tiny amount. And so, I mean, to me, what they're doing is not enough, and it is a sticking plaster because they're still not taking it really seriously enough.
Totally, absolutely right.
So the Food Foundation have said that to meet the government healthy eating guidelines, people on the lowest incomes would have to spend 50% of their income on food. So clearly this isn't realistic. Given it's so hard to eat a nutritious diet on low income, we'll break it down to see what people can actually do. So what are your top tips for setting your kids on the right path to a good diet?
Well, we've talked about kids, and we haven't really talked about tiny kids, but there's absolutely no question that the habits around food start at a very early age. But also when kids are barely mobile, but they start to eat solid food, they're actually very curious and they're very interested in trying lots and lots of different foods. There's a strange evolutionary, not strange, there's an interesting evolutionary reason why kids suddenly become a little bit fussier about food, it's to do with their mobility. Once you can wander off independently of your carer, your parent, your mum or whatever, it's a really bad idea to put random berries or stones or things that you find in your mouth. So a kind of protective instinct kicks in that the foods that you're already familiar with are safe, and anything else is to be treated with a little bit of superstition. That's quite hard to overcome. That makes a really interesting case for putting lots of different foods in front of kids when they're young. And also not necessarily with the pressure of you've got to eat this, but just so they can see them, just so they can be familiar with them. Unfortunately, we're in a culture where a lot of the first foods that babies ever see and get eaten just comes out of a jar and it's a coloured bit of mush on a spoon. But if you just even give them like half a carrot to play with, it doesn't really matter if they shove it up their nose, take a bite, throw it at you. But just showing them that's what food is. And you can get past that barrier of resistance by doing that to kids right through sort of primary school age. There's an amazing educational program called Taste Ed, that's working in various schools around the country that just basically goes into classrooms and says, this is what food looks like. Have a play with the carrot. You know, anything that's on this plate, you can eat it if you want, but just have a look at it. And they are basically breaking down from first principles a problem of deep unfamiliarity with what food is, especially what fresh fruit and vegetables are, that is incredibly, as Tiggy said, much more widespread than we know, and probably much more widespread than our politicians could imagine. But that is the case. And there are fun and interesting ways, but it shouldn't be falling to smart charities who've had these ideas. Once those ideas are understood, they should be taken up. You know, it's not beyond the wit of man to prove that those interventions can make a difference, and then for the government to say, OK, let's do a bit more of that.
Thank you. Tiggy.
Yeah, mums have told us over the years that they worry about food hygiene, and they have sort of got completely absorbed by the advertising that is bombarded at vulnerable parents. We're all a bit vulnerable when we've just had a baby. It's just like, oh, I don't know what I'm doing and stuff like that. And immediately the food companies have got in there, and it's safer. It's safer. Your child will be fed better out of a jar. And so mothers actually think really consciously, some of them, making a decision to do the jar because they think it is best for their child. And so it is, to me, there's a huge confidence thing here. It's like, you can do this. Whether you're making a mush or giving a whole carrot, it doesn't really matter. You can do either, but whichever you do will be fine. You know, you can just whiz it. It doesn't have, you know.
And do it while your child is watching.
Absolutely.
Let them see that carrot turn into a mush.
Yeah.
Let them understand where the mush came from.
Absolutely, yeah. And, you know, I think that whole confidence thing for a parent is a huge, huge thing. And we, you know, and as Hugh says, familiarity is absolutely key.
Thank you. What are your favourite nutritious, cheap and easy go-to dishes?
Well, I think, one of the issues that I'm sure Tiggy comes up against and her team come up against a lot is what equipment people have got in their kitchen, because it can be very, very basic. If you have got an oven, and not everybody has, tray roasts of veg are just so easy. And you can just pick a couple of onions, a couple of potatoes, not that exciting on their own, but you get a couple of carrots on the tray, maybe a bit of cauliflower, and if you've got a bit of spice in the cupboard, and you toss it all together and whack it in the oven till it's all a bit crispy and crinkled around the edges, that's really delicious. And people suddenly get to understand that the veg isn't either kind of raw and therefore sometimes a bit challenging or bland and boiled. It can actually be transformed. And it's amazing how much we obsess over fish and meat, using our ovens and our grills and our barbecues to get that crispy crust on the crackling on the pork or the crispy skin on the chicken. You can get crispy skin on a carrot, and you can get caramelized corners on a parsnip, and you can get beautiful burnt charred sugars on a wedge of cabbage on a barbecue or in the oven. So learning that you can develop those flavors and concentrate them and intensify them by using an oven is a very, very useful thing. And suddenly the food gets much tastier. And if you like spice, and lots of people like spice, but they're buying spicy chips instead of getting it, into a nice range of good, healthy ingredients. So a good tray roast of different seasonal veg, onions, potatoes, roots, and cauliflower, something from the brassica family, cauliflower, a wedge of cabbage. Toss them all together and whack them in the oven.
Perfect. Tiggy, what's your go-to?
Mine's a one-pot thing. So on the hob, I was brought up in West Africa, and so it's inspired by my time there. It can be made either with chicken or just with veg, but it's a groundnut stew. Oh, so it has lots of spices, but its base is peanut butter. In this country, It's not groundnuts, but it's peanuts, but it's still absolutely delicious and super, super easy.
Yeah, I mean, one-pot dishes are brilliant. And of course, one thing we haven't mentioned, but is actually I'm getting involved in what I think could be quite an exciting campaign, beans. Beans and pulses are really inexpensive, easy to store, easy to use, Most people actually, when asked, say that they like them. Most people say they've got them in the kitchen. But most people also say they've been in the kitchen for at least 6 months. We've got to get them out of the back of the cupboard and start using them because they're so nutritious. They've got that amazing balance of protein and carbs and great fibre and lots of other good nutrients. And they're so versatile, including, throw a tin of chickpeas onto that tray roast, put it back in the oven for the last 10 minutes, or indeed in your...
What's your stew called? Is it ndole? What's the...
Well, it depends which country you want to make it. There are lots of different versions of it.
But I bet some of them have beans in.
Yeah, they do, absolutely. Yeah, no, absolutely.
And once you've got anything saucy or tomato-y, I mean, if you're improvising cooking at home, or heating up leftovers, or playing around, I look at almost anything, I'd say, oh, should I put a tin of beans in that? And more than half the time the answer is, yeah, why not?
So you touched a little bit earlier on diversity. Is 30 plants a week achievable for all families? And for those who struggle with time or financially, would you still advocate trying to hit this target?
Well, a very fair question, and just the background to that is I happen to have written a book called How to Eat 30 Plants a Week. I have 2 copies with me, and I will be auctioning them off shortly. So how I answer this question is probably going to... realistically, I don't think trying to go to a family that's struggling with confidence around veg and telling them they should be trying to eat 30 plants a week is probably that realistic. What is interesting, though, is for people who cook, people who enjoy cooking, and have some basic cooking skills, we all still get stuck in ruts, and we literally forget the things that we like. And 30 plants a week, by the way, the important thing is that I'm not just talking about fresh vegetables. I'm talking about your peanut butter that you put in the stew. Talking about spices. Yeah. And going back to the gut health story, which we talked about earlier, which is so fundamental, that diversity of mostly plant foods is the best recipe for a healthy gut, and even small amounts of spice. So there were the 30 plant science came out of was an unintended consequence of an experiment which was trying to compare the health outcomes of 3 of the major self-expressed diets, which are I'm an omnivore, I'm a vegan, or I'm a vegetarian. So the science was experiments. Okay, so which of these diets are the healthier? So they asked the group of omnivores, group of vegans, and a group of vegetarians to keep accurate food diaries for an extended period. And it was a big group, 11,000 people between the States and the UK were involved in the study. And when they came to analyse the diets, they could not say with any reliable pattern that if you described yourself as an omnivore or a vegetarian or vegan, you were going to be any healthier or less healthy than anyone else who did that. But what the data gave them was, well, it doesn't really matter whether you're an omnivore, a vegetarian, or a vegan. Everyone in this study who's eating more vegetables has got much better health outcomes and much more, when they then went back to test the gut diversity, much more diverse gut biomes. So, and the strange thing is, you might expect that vegetarians and vegans eat more vegetables than omnivores, but they don't. In fact, often people who take up veganism for very understandable ideological reasons aren't very confident cooks, and they eat a lot of vegan junk food, and they eat a lot of poor nutrition, ready-made vegan meals, and then they don't cook a lot of fresh vegetables. A lot of omnivores, enthusiastic cooks, like their food, put lots of veg alongside the chicken or lots of veg in the stew. So in that sense, maybe it wasn't such a great surprise that they couldn't pick between them with the science. But the curve went just up and up in terms of positive health outcomes the more vegetables you ate. Well, why don't you say try and eat 50 vegetables a week? Because it isn't realistic. What they found was that actually about more than half the people who said they liked vegetables and were interested in cooking were already cooking, actually eating, if you measure the spices and the nuts and the seeds and the beans as well as the fresh vegetables, they were eating 30 plants a week without even knowing it. So it's not an unrealistic target if you're ready to do a bit of cooking and you're ready to remind yourself just what's out there, and don't go crazy and start buying lots of unfamiliar foods that you don't know what to do with. But one of the things in the book is a checklist. How many of these vegetables do you like, and how many of them have you eaten in the last 6 months? There's usually a big gap between that list of what you actually know you like and what you're regularly eating. And back to the beans and pulses, because actually lots of the plants that can help us get to 30 plants a week are store cupboard ingredients. Nuts, seeds, nut butters, pulses, things in tins. That doesn't count as a worryingly processed food. A tin of beans, if it's just in a little bit of brine in a tin, if it's got lots of other things like frankfurters and sauce in it, maybe give it a miss. So it's really about setting out on a bit of a new adventure to remind yourself what exciting plant foods are out there, and lots of easy ways to get them in your recipes.
Thank you. Tiggy?
I think I'd just like to add, Hugh's absolutely right, it might not be achievable for everybody, but it's great. Some people, that kind of thing motivates them. Other people, it terrifies them. And I think that we have to find our way through. That's why Project Food works on such an individual level, because for all of us, we've all got such food baggage from our childhoods, some good, some bad, that any sort of, I've got to do more of this, or I've got to do, it can just be totally intimidating for some people. But for other people, it's totally motivational.
Some people like ticking boxes.
Absolutely. And
some people like freestyling it, and some people like literally, and indeed, there is an inside and back, inside cover and inside back cover of the book, there is a checklist of 260 plants, and I bet you've heard of every single one of them. Haven't necessarily eaten them all in the last week. A couple of seaweeds maybe might be a bit obscure, but everything else in there, you've heard it, you've tried it at least once, you know whether you like it.
Thank you. Hugh, in your 2018 programme, Britain's Fat Fight, you visited your doctor and you were told that you were at risk of developing type 2 diabetes. How did that make you feel, and what did you do to change your behaviour as a result of your doctor's warning?
Well, it made me feel like a little bit of an idiot, because, but it didn't. It also didn't completely surprise me. I knew I was a little bit overweight, and that I've been, feeling a little stressed. Work was quite full on for a while, and I completely relate to that situation where you turn to easy foods that are not so good for you when you're feeling a bit stressed or a bit tired. And indeed, easy drinks, which is a way many of us like to relax. And I think my relationship with food is a little bit cyclical, and that I do have to do a reset once in a while. Like I have to, a little bit of a wake-up call there. Well, let's get back into that veg garden, and maybe just stop treating myself to all my favourite cheeses all the time and that kind of thing. I mean, food, for those, if you work with food and you work around food, it's because you love food. And if you've through more by luck than judgment, by the way, just because I've been lucky enough to be involved in some quite interesting projects where lots of other people have done the graft and the research, but I've managed to hang on to a little bit of it. I do have some understanding of what healthy food is about, but that doesn't mean it's easy for all of us, or even for me. So I think that it's great to love food, and loving food gives you an opportunity to find a way to cook that keeps you well, but it also gives you an opportunity to indulge in things that you know you really enjoy. So I think as I got a little bit older, I think more about that than I did, but every now and again it's like, oh yeah, I wouldn't mind a massive macaroni cheese.
Thank you. Tiggy, could you tell us about somebody that Project Food is supporting at the moment?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to talk about John. He's in his 60s, and he was recently diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. And then very soon after his diagnosis, his wife died. So he was completely flummoxed, totally grieving his wife, but at the same time going, I need to sort myself out, and I don't quite know what to do. His wife did all the cooking, and he literally didn't know one end of a pan. I mean, he took things out of the oven, and when he came to our sessions with our oven gloves, he had no clue at all. And I could totally relate to that, because when my mother had a stroke, my father just couldn't function at all. He was totally flummoxed, he was totally heartbroken, and he was terribly underweight, so he had to feed himself up, and he just had no idea what to do. It was really, really hard to see, and that's exactly the situation that John was in when we came across him, and he came to Project Food, and he needed somebody just to hold his hand, really, just to break it down into a manageable thing, because it's an enormous, you hear, I've given you some horrible stuff about what happens to some people with type 2 diabetes. So he was going, oh my God, I'm going to die, and I'm going to get this, I'm going to get that. And you're that kind of like, you're like a rabbit in headlights, and and so therefore you can't do anything. And with his wife dying as well, it's doubly bad. So he came to Project Food, and he did our diabetes course. And at the end of it, he was just transformed, because we were able to just give him that time, not only for him to learn about nutrition and about cooking and about what he should be eating and shouldn't, but to hold his hand, to be there and be able to support him. He was just, I think that's the thing that everybody says about Project Food, is how we clearly care. And it's not just a lot of people. One of our dear course leaders is in the audience tonight, which is lovely to see. And, she really cares about whether they get something out of it or not. And that's what I suppose that's the luxury of being a charity in a way, is that is our core. That is absolutely fundamental to us. And if we're not achieving that, then we might as well not be here. And John really, really picked up on that, and he really thrived as a result of that. So, yeah.
It's a wonderful story. I mean, we've emphasised, how important it is that we, get to kids when they're young. But people can learn to change and get new habits. And what a lot of this is about, I think, is resilience, because we're all going to have really tough times in our lives when things go wrong. If we can put a meal together from reasonably inexpensive ingredients with a little bit of confidence from at any age, but if we can get that instilled, particularly with young people, that is resilience in a very hard world. You can look after yourself, you can look after your partner, you can look after your kids, if you can get some inexpensive ingredients and make them into a decent meal. Now, that kind of resilience is priceless. If you can depend on someone else to do it for you, you don't know how priceless it is. If that's taken away from you, you straight away realise just how important and useful and it gives you self-respect, but it genuinely gives you resilience in the world.
Thank you. Hugh, why do you support Project Food and the fundraising?
Are we? It's just like we're getting towards the end. And also, why should everybody in this room support Project Food and its fundraising?
Kind of the point.
Look, we've heard some great stories. I think I think a lot of what we've talked about this evening, lots of you know in your heart of hearts, or you know from personal experience because of people you know. But I do think we cannot stand idly by and let the urgent issue of diet and health just be sort of swept under the carpet, like as if it's some sort of nice to have, as if dealing with it as a policy priority would be indulgent somehow for a politician to do. Now, those kind of changes at the political level are not going to happen overnight, and even if they did happen soon, it would take a long time for them to bed in. And who would be the best people for the politicians making those policies to come and learn from? People like Project Food and Tiggy and everybody who works with her, who's here this evening. They are doing, and that's why the work they're doing is so important, not just because it helps people like John and it has an amazing reach into the community and it's transforming lives here in East Devon, but it's because it's an incredible resource of insight into how you do actually make a difference. So that if anyone chose to listen and really do something about it, charities like Project Food, well, Project Food especially, would be incredibly well placed to help make a bigger difference at a national scale. But meanwhile, we all live round here. We want to be part of a thriving community. and no one's working harder at making that happen here in East Devon than Tiggy and Project Food. So we are getting to that part of the evening where we're going to ask you, I believe I'm going to literally be asking you to dip in your pockets and put up your hands. So if you've enjoyed the evening so far, but also if you've been a little bit moved and a little bit persuaded that this is important, really important stuff, please dig deep, get excited about what's on offer, because there are some fantastic lots at many, many different levels. And please get involved, and we'll have a bit of fun, and we'll see if we can make a real difference this evening to help Tiggy and her team go on doing this incredible work.
Can I just add one thing to that, if you wouldn't mind, just to underline what he said, if you don't mind? I think this is, I've said before, it's 19 years old, Project Food. This is the most difficult time we've faced. It is, without doubt, there is a perfect storm going on for small charities, and the lack of government funding, and there are so many other things that people are trying to go for, and there are so many people who are living at this food poverty that is increasing, as Kerry told us, it's increasing hugely, and the need is increasing. It shouldn't be increasing. We know, as Hugh's articulated, we should be starting to decrease it all by now, but we're not. And because of the funding problems, and because of the fact that the problem is getting worse, we are, I'm afraid to say, in the most precarious situation that we've been in since I set it up 19 years ago. And that's a rather sad place to be. But you could make a difference to that tonight.
And you will, and you will. Brilliant.
Is there anything else you'd like to add just before we open up the floor for questions?
Well, I think let's have some questions, and then let's have some auction.
Yeah, absolutely. Does anybody have any questions?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Hi.
How would you encourage people in your remit to do fermented foods, to make their own fermented foods? Because it's such a foreign idea to actually put something in a jar and let it fester. To encourage them to try.
I'm very interested to see whether Tiggy and to what extent that you've managed to get involved with it, because actually it isn't super hard, but it is quite scary for a lot of people. But it is, people are becoming very interested in it, and you obviously are, and we haven't brought it up yet, so it's a really interesting question.
Well, I'm really pleased to say that one of my trustees' partner is River Cottage's fermenting person, Rachel.
Rachel, she is an absolute guru.
And she has been along. We do a course in our kitchens in Axminster for children who are at risk of being excluded from school, and so they're kind of on the edge of school. They may go, they may not, and if they go, they're so disruptive they get sent home again. So they send them to us, and we've done some wonderful fermenting sessions. Rachel's come in and done them with that, and then they've gone off to a farm and looked at other stuff as well, which is it's been really good. So actually, I think at that age it's great because they're kind of really interested in things like that. I think it might be. We haven't tried it with older people, but I think that there's more scope in that, definitely.
It's a fun project. When things transform, because when there's a little bit of science or a little bit of mystery, and sometimes those two things can go together, that's particularly engaging for kids and young people. So it's actually a good way in. It's not necessarily super scary.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, so I was listening to a podcast recently by the Bantolkans about the use of chia seeds and people putting lots of chia seeds in their food and seeing it as medicinal, not as food, and they were touting that might not be a good thing. And I noticed in your apple crumble you didn't mention cinnamon, which if you're diabetic is crucial to any sugary thing to helping your body digest those sugars. So how do you see the argument for healthy food versus medicinal food?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, that. Nuts and seeds are generally really healthy foods. I think if you turn one particular ingredient into a sort of almost like a religious experience, which can sometimes happen, I think you're probably already overemphasizing what it's ever going to do for you on its own. I think chia seeds are an interesting ingredient. I quite like that weird slippery frog spawn mess that they make. Not everybody does. But I think it's quite interesting if you mix it with, I don't know, some crushed berries or something like that. And I don't have it like every day. And I wouldn't get into that thing, even if there's I don't know what the scientific or potentially pseudo-scientific arguments around chia seeds are exactly, but I know it's something to do with the fact that they're slimy and slimy is good, etc., etc. And there probably is something in that.
I think they're there to displace the need for eating proper fibre.
Oh, okay, but they have got some fibre too, but they slow down digestion of other things. So they're probably not a bad ingredient. Spices and cinnamon, and spices have lots of different properties, and you can also fixate on them. People get very fixated on turmeric or ginger, and it's probably no bad thing to have quite a lot of turmeric and quite a lot of ginger, especially if it's fresh, and put it in your cooking. I think that I would just go back to the argument around diversity. If you're experimenting regularly, if you're bringing the changes, not buying the same old things over and over again, and you enjoy a few seeds and you change them around, and also some seeds are really, including chia seeds, really quite expensive. Sunflower seeds, not very expensive at all. Stick them in your cakes and your cookies. If you like to bake with a bit less sugar, bake with a whole of flour, and bake with nuts and seeds and a few dried fruits. Delicious, and just immediately you're moving away from all those refined ingredients. Cinnamon, my wife doesn't like it. or actually, what she specifically doesn't like it with apple. So cinnamon and apple is a combo, which I quite like it, but I do think it can be very quickly overdone. People get a bit gung-ho with the cinnamon, it's like, doesn't even taste of apple anymore. But my wife likes cinnamon in curries and savoury foods, and so do I. I don't mind it in the apple, but I'll give her the benefit of the doubt.
Thank you. Any other questions?
You mentioned about other countries. Does any country get this right, or even in the UK, does any region of the UK sort of do it a bit better than East Devon?
Well, feeding kids at school, we were talking about particularly. Yeah. I think in parts of France, and I think it is quite regional, one of the things that's interesting in the for the school food culture in the UK, it's all about the cafeteria, and you move your tray along and you make your choices. You'd think that would be a good thing, because there should be something on that tray, on that selection that kids like. But it also means they do have the opportunity to always have the pizza and the chips and none of the other things. What they do in quite a lot of schools in France is they have a sit-down, no choice, 3-course meal. Not necessarily, I don't mean they have like posh French restaurant food, but they just have something simple to start with, a hot meal and then a dessert. And there is no choice outside of, I'm sure, if you're veggie, you can get a veggie option or a vegan option. There's no choice. Kids are hungry. They get with the program. They eat. The food is okay. It looks like proper food. It's not shaped like a dinosaur. It's not pizza every day. It's just what, more or less pretty good, okay food looks like on a plate, and that's what you learn to eat. It's not a bad format for feeding kids.
Yeah, I mean, Finland did have a problem, and they decided to change everything, root and branch. And every political party signed up to it, and they have completely transformed the diet of and the health of their population. So it can be done. I know it's a much smaller population than us, but still, it can be done with political will, and there is evidence for that, yeah.
And there are cities around the world where food policy and school food is controlled at a city mayor level. Even in the US, they've had some quite big successes in certain cities.
And the problem is also that packed lunches that kids come in with from home are often worse than what's in school. So I suppose getting rid of the ability to take packed lunch in and making everyone just have to have a hot meal, and you'd win them over if that was free. Like you say, if it was all free, then they wouldn't send packed lunches because it's cheaper than food to school.
Yeah.
Yes, and free for everybody probably as well. So it's not a stigma, just the people on free school meals. So it just becomes taken for granted that's what you do.
I don't know whether we'll ever get there, but free school meals of decent quality for primary age kids could potentially be utterly transformative, not just of their lives at school, but the whole of their lives and the whole of the food culture for the nation going forward.
Thank you. Did you have a question?
I did, but it's sort of been covered with various other answers that have come back. But what frightens me is I think we have a generation of teenagers that have been brought up on, junk food. They're used to sort of salty, fatty, and when they have the choice, that's what they're going to choose because that's what they know. And it's a case of having to sort of de-educate them on that. And then lots of fresh stuff that we cook from scratch is often very bland compared to what they're used to. They're used to a takeaway pizza, takeaway curry, and it just frightens me that having to convert them into having things that are fresh, like a lovely vegetable soup, or they're just not going to be interested, and you've got to get over that barrier with them. And like you were saying about in France, where they have this sort of sit down, this is what you have, for 3 courses. That's brilliant. We don't have anything like that here. They always have a choice. They have the choice of pizza, have the choice of something else spicy. They don't get the choice of.
We didn't used to at primary school, did we?
No.
I think it's I'm really interested to wonder what Tiggy thinks particularly about teenagers, because you're right. There's a sort of mantra that if you can't get them by the 10 or 11, you probably lost them. But I'm sure I know you work with teenagers, and some of them can be.
I think that we say
engaged.
to them, "What do you want to learn? What do you want to learn to cook? What's your favourite takeaway?" And they tell us what our favourite takeaway is, and we teach them how to cook it. And it can be bland if you don't spice it. And we just say replace the salt or sugar or whatever it might be with the spices and other things. And
it's
actually,
the spices that they love are not a bad thing. It's the salt and the sugar that they.
So actually, we work very hard with them to get them to define what they want to learn. Really, that's the only way to do it with sort of teenagers, and they're quite responsive.
Can they be bothered though? That's. So much more effort in doing it yourself.
I think it's difficult because a lot of them have a difficult food environment at home, but it's experience, it's confidence, it builds. It really does build, and if you have people not for 6 weeks, but for longer, you can develop different habits. And maybe right now, while they're at home, they haven't got that opportunity, but at least they won't be scared, and they know what to do with things. And there's masses of evidence to show that if you know how to cook, your nutrition is likely to be better.
I think it's interesting with teenagers that some of them for sure are going to be hard to reach. But one of the great things about food and cooking is it doesn't judge. It doesn't mind what you're... And I extend this to the world of hospitality, and it's one of the reasons I love working in it, because people come to work as chefs who may find other jobs or may have struggled at school. They may be very bright, and then they find food, and it goes, well, food doesn't mind what my GCSE results are. Food doesn't mind even if I was in trouble when I was a young adult. So we actually work with another charity called Switchback, which contacts young offenders in jail and gets them some training around food when they're inside and helps them get jobs in hospitality when they come out. And I think you could take a little bit of that as in a way that Tiggy just has, but so you can engage teenagers sometimes in an unexpected way. They're fed up, they're grumbly, and they're fed up with this and that, and suddenly food's like, oh, you mean I can actually cook that curry? And they get that little bit of sense of pride and interest in something that they can do that other people can't, and they're not being graded for it in a school way or whatever. So that won't apply to all teenagers, but it can actually give them something that's missing and give them something new to be excited about.
So I think we're probably nearly auction time, but if I can just say thank you so much for tonight's conversation. If we just give them a round of applause.
Thank you very much. Well done. That's great.